Hi, everybody. I have the opportunity to be here with Major General William Enyart, retired from the Illinois Army National Guard. I'm going to go through a little bit of his background. It is wide and varied. I think you'll find it interesting. And we're going to talk about Venezuela because obviously that is the point of discussion right now with recent strikes on Venezuela by the U.S. Major General William Enyart, veteran, author, as well as a lawyer, enlisted in the Air Force in 1976 and then served 36 years of military service overall, where he wound up as the adjutant general for the Illinois Army National Guard. He was the commander of the Illinois National Guard when they deployed to Kiev in July of 2005, received the Polish Army Medal in 2011 due to the history of the Illinois National Guard and Polish Army cooperation. They did several deployments together, including Afghanistan. You have a law degree from the Southern Illinois University of Law, retired in 2012. That wasn't enough for you, sir. You then decided to serve in Congress for 2 years, 2013, 2015. I believe it was the 12th Congressional District in Illinois. And you've also written a book, which I mentioned, you being an author, Leadership in Challenging Times, which was published in 2023, but it sure seems to be pertinent now because I would consider these to be challenging times anytime we're under a Trump administration. It just seems to be that way. But we've got you here today to talk about the topic of the day, or at least a couple days, depending on the news cycle, and that is the fact that the U.S. struck targets inside of Venezuela, and then apparently there were about 150 military aircraft involved, including their crews. I believe some of those were drones, I'm sure, but also it looks like Delta was on the ground. We've known that CIA has been conducting operations in the country for multiple months, per President Trump, and Delta apparently spirited away Maduro and his wife. They are currently on a U.S. warship, which I believe is headed towards, or at least they're being ferried back to the U.S., apparently for trial. Another indictment was issued today by the DOJ. And as this took place this morning and you woke up and realized this was going on, I think a lot of people would like to get your thoughts as a senior military leader on what kind of went through your head as you woke up to this news.
I certainly do have some thoughts about it. But before we get into my thoughts about it, I do need to make one slight correction in my
Okay.
bio, and which I'm sure you took from the National Guard website or some
Yep.
official Army thing. I actually enlisted in the Air Force
Yep.
in 1969
Okay.
and served in the Air Force until 75. And then I had a break in service while I went back and I was an enlisted guy, and had a break in service while I went back, got my degree, got my law degree. And then I joined the Guard in 82. And of course, the way they back things up, then they just subtract from the day I went back in the Guard, subtracted back to 6 years, which put it back to, so it looks like I enlisted in 76, but that if you go look at my DD
Gotcha.
214, that's not quite what it is. So no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem at all. It's, after all these decades, it probably doesn't matter much, except I'm very proud of the fact that I managed to serve with that 9-year break in service. I managed to serve across 6 decades, from the
It's a lot.
60s to the 20 teens. So, that's pretty hard to do, but it was
Yeah.
because of that break
You've
in
seen
service
quite a
that I
bit.
had. So, I watched the president's news conference in full, and I found it very interesting that he spent a whole lot more time talking about oil than he did talking about drugs. So one has to wonder what the real impetus for this military strike was. It was, they've predicated a lot of this on drugs, and said that it's narco-terrorism, yada, yada, yada. But a whole lot less time was spent talking about narco-terrorism today from the president's own lips than was oil. And, he particularly seemed to be energized and outraged by the Venezuelan expropriation of oil from American companies 50 years ago. So this is not exactly late breaking news. It's been through countless administrations, both Republican and Democrat. So there is that. I think the person that made the most sense in in the news conference really was General Kane. He stuck to the facts. It was very much operational. It was very much just here's what we did, here's how we did it. He didn't get into politics. He didn't get into any of the praising Trump, hating Biden sort of thing that Hegseth and to a lesser extent Secretary Rubio got into. So I thought he did a fine job as a military officer and kept it very nonpartisan. Um, the I'm far more concerned about what tomorrow is going to bring. This was a brilliant operation. Our military is great at planning, great at execution, no question about it. We did a great job, no question. Maduro's a bad guy. All right.
Yep.
Now, what's tomorrow bring? What is the plan? We heard the president say we're going to be running the country. Really? When did we get elected, or when did we get chosen, or who chose us to run this country? And do you think maybe the Venezuelan people might have something to say about that? This is just a real example of hubris that goes beyond the pale. And how do we try to take the moral high ground now? Not if, but when China attacks Taiwan.
Sure.
Taiwan is a whole lot closer to China's coast than Venezuela ever thought about being to the U.S. coast. I thought it was interesting that one of the reporters asked the president point blank, "Well, why did you seize, or how do you rationalize?" I'm paraphrasing, of course. How do you rationalize seizing Maduro, invading a foreign country, seizing Maduro, when you just pardoned a guy who was convicted of importing $500 million worth of cocaine into this country? Give me a break. And Trump's answer was, frankly, didn't hold water in my opinion. Well, it was Biden's fault, and he was framed.
Of course.
Oh, come on now. This was a guy who was convicted by a jury, and you don't get convicted of importing $500 million worth of cocaine because somebody decided to frame you. Maybe a couple of grams of cocaine, but not $500 million worth. So, but what does the future bring, and what does this mean for our relationships in South America? We've got a long and fairly dishonorable history of invading Latin American countries, whether it was Cuba in 1898, and we're still holding Guantanamo, or whether it's the banana republics in the Central Americas, where we supported the fruit companies over any kind of free government or any kind of native government in Latin America. And I think it's going to certainly have an adverse impact on our relations with other Latin American countries. I thought we would have learned our lesson maybe in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Libya, where we have taken out dictatorships and admittedly bad governments, terrible people. But what's left? Libya's in chaos. It's in civil war. Afghanistan, the Taliban rules once again. So we have not had a great track record here in some of these incursions that we've made.
Yeah, and I think you brought it up a couple times, but the term haphazard jumps to mind. It doesn't really, after all of our military history, it doesn't really seem like anybody wants to have a plan. And I know there are plans out there. I've worked in plans before. I just don't think anybody wants to hear them because they have their own decision-making matrix of why they're going to do things and when. And it certainly seems like this, or he feels it benefits him in a way to distract from the Epstein files, which seems to be about the one thing that he truly cares about over and over. And the timing of this has been kind of sketchy, to say the least, but obviously it benefits if he is being kind of directed in some ways by big oil. It certainly seems to be the benefit of big oil. As you mentioned, he talked about oil the entire, or half of, the entire brief, and what a benefit it was going to be. But how does that take place? And you brought this up. How do we run the country? I am sure the CIA is still in there. They are probably working with Machado and trying to get her ascent to power, but she is not in charge. And half the country, although Maduro is a bad guy, and being gone can't be all bad, but Maduro is a bad guy, but had his supporters and had support of the military. So what happens now? And I think when you talk about the domino and the ripple effects, you know, it is hubris. It is Trump coming up and saying, we're going to go ahead and we're going to run the country. Not quite sure how we're going to do it yet. And I hope it goes well, but we're going to run the country. And he even brought up the fact that it could have gone horribly wrong. 50, air crews, not counting drones or maybe counting drones. And then the people on the ground, it could have gone horribly wrong. And he said that in his speech. And it just seems like the decision making, we've known this in both administrations that he has run the country. The decision making is haphazard and
Well,
seems to be yeah,
I think that's clear. And you've got the other problem. Hey, we did a great job militarily. Okay,
yeah, sure.
but he's gutted the State Department. He's
Yep.
gutted every lever of soft power that we have. So, are we going to go in and run this the way we ran Haiti with Marines back in the 30s? Or are we going to, there's nobody left who can go in there and help reestablish this? USAID's gone. The vast swaths of the State Department. Those are the folks who deal every day with the elements of government, with the NGOs. We have very little ability to use soft power anymore in any of these countries. And the CIA wasn't built to run governments.
Right.
U.S. Army wasn't built to run governments, and it seems to me that there's probably going to be a great deal of pushback, even from those folks who are opposed to Maduro. They don't want the United States of America running their country. They don't want Anglos in there running their government.
Sure.
So I this the branches and sequels that we have here, and the unforeseen collateral damage that's going to occur. These folks, in my opinion, just don't seem to think things through to fairly logical conclusions.
Yeah. No, and I would almost expect, I guess I would expect somebody like Rubio to think through that, because Rubio is not a dumb individual. He has worked, he's been a senator, he knows what he's talking about. He led the bipartisan committee that found that Russia interfered on Trump's behalf, and then lost his spine on the way to becoming Secretary of State. But he knows what's going on. And even watching him in that press conference, when Trump was trying to talk about the Monroe Doctrine or the Donroe documents, which he calls it now, Rubio couldn't even look at the camera. I mean the level of, and it goes back to the Zelensky, Trump shouting match in the White House, where Rubio tried to become a part of the couch because he was so embarrassed by what was taking place. So you would expect there are people in that lane. Kane knows there are people that want a plan, who think we need a plan, and we're in a haphazard administration where decisions aren't made with any kind of understanding of dominoes or ripple effects. It's just, I want what I want, and I'm going to try to take it, and I hope it goes well. So I think you're right.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that Trump seems to me to make decisions based entirely on the economics of something.
For him,
So he and Witkoff and Kushner
yes,
think there's great money to be made in Russia, and
yes,
all they think that they can control Putin through money. You can't control it, and they don't understand or have a grip at all on the way Putin thinks or on the way
no,
that Zelensky thinks. This is an existential crisis for both those guys. Putin knows that if he loses this war, he's toast.
yep,
Zelensky the same, and the Ukrainian people, I don't think. Will ever want to be ruled by Russia. They've seen what Russia's done in the past. They know what Russia led by folks like Putin will do. So, these people are in there thinking that they're playing, poker with these guys. These guys aren't playing poker. If they're playing poker, they got submachine guns on their laps. I mean,
Yeah.
they're serious about this stuff. And so you Donald Trump's background is as a real estate developer. He thinks the entire world, and particularly any agency or legal system that tries to restrain him, he thinks it's a big, giant zoning board. And he can either bully or browbeat or bribe the zoning board to get what he wants. Well, that's not quite the way the real world operates. The world of hotel developers may operate like that in some instances, but how long do you suppose it would be if Putin decided he wanted to have the Trump Hotel in Moscow, if he ever let Donald build it, before Putin would take it over?
Yep.
And I guarantee you, having spent time in a lot of time in Eastern Europe, I would guarantee you that Trump hotel would be full of video cameras in every room, catching all sorts of interesting compromise.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does seem like he's playing his own version of Monopoly right now with people's lives, like just trying to take over as many places and get hotels in as many places as he can. You brought up Russia, which I think is a great perspective. There was an article, I wish I could remember who exactly wrote it, but they were talking about what we might be seeing as a potential shift in the world order where potentially Putin is willing to he'll say all the right things about, don't attack Venezuela, don't do this, but it almost appears like he's willing to give up Venezuela. Not that there's been a whole lot of Russian intervention at times, um, in exchange for potentially Trump's extra pressure on Zelensky to get this deal done, which this deal is certainly beneficial to Putin, where he will not cede any ground. And I really wonder, I was talking about this earlier, but I really wonder if we're going to see an extra push from Trump now on Zelensky to sign the deal that is beneficial to Putin and, kind of makes him out to be the victor in this of Putin getting what he wants. And I know that there are pieces in the international puzzle that they're dominoes and they're ripple effects. I would love to get your thoughts on that, if you have any, about how this ties over into Ukraine.
Well, I think where we probably ought to start this discussion is with the new national security strategy,
Yep.
which is less a national security strategy than it is a surrender document.
Sure.
If Dwight David Eisenhower read that document, or Ronald Reagan, or George H.W. Bush, any Republican president since World War II, they would be astonished, appalled, and just
Absolutely.
shocked at it, because what we're doing, we're retreating from the world.
Yep.
We're saying, okay, China, you get the Indo-Pacific. Oh, there's a little bit of language that says, well, we're going to hang out in there. The real thrust of it is that we're surrendering Europe to Russia's sphere of influence, and we're surrendering Asia to China's sphere of influence, and we're gonna go back to 1820s, and we're going to control the Western Hemisphere.
Yep.
That when I read that national security strategy, I've had to read a lot of those things over the years, and this was just absolutely appalling. I mean, whoever wrote it to praise Donald Trump and to keep his or her job in the national security establishment, but it certainly does not contain any serious strategy elements. And I think some of them too. The one of the things that really has not been talked about at all with this whole Venezuelan adventure is the cost of it. When you move the fort and its all of its escort ships and all of those soldiers, sailors, Marines, and you pull those folks into the Caribbean, so you've got the cost to the American taxpayer. Now, soldiers, sailors, Marines, they get paid every day anyway, but you've got the extra costs of getting them there, keeping them there, the costs on the families, the costs on the soldiers or the service members for being there. And what you have done is you've removed a big capital chess piece from the European and the Middle East. The fort is a powerful symbol of American might, and you've just taken that off the chessboard. So there have been some additional costs there in terms of our national security. And Trump, plays this as some kind of national security issue. It, Venezuela can, can load those speedboats up with cocaine, headed for Europe, by the way, most of it, and send them out into the Caribbean. But they're hardly a threat to U.S. national security interests. And if he really wanted to get serious about this, he'd bolster the Coast Guard down there and stop them that way, rather than sending in the Gerald Ford. That was clearly sent in for this military adventure.
Absolutely. I think General Kane said it had been planned for months, which
Right.
goes along with that, with what you're saying. Um, it's not just drug interdiction with boats. While, as you mentioned before, you're pardoning the guy who moved 400 tons, helped to move 400 tons during his stay as president of Honduras. It was never about drugs. He didn't really mention drugs. You know, I believe even Maduro tried to call his bluff 2 days ago where he said, "Hey, I'm willing to talk to the US about drugs and drug trafficking, and I'm willing to come, to some kind of agreement and talk about that," which in my personal opinion was the last thing Trump wanted, despite his aspirations for a Nobel Peace Prize. The last thing he wanted in this situation was peace. And he wanted some kind of violent conflict or overthrow of Maduro to get what he wanted, what big oil wanted, to distract from the files, all of these things. And it all seems to kind of blend together. Like, what he says is rarely what is real, and we've figured that out over two administrations and then the space in between. Um, we we talked about the. Do you think this is going to be? Hopefully not, but in your opinion, especially with your background, um, do you think this is going to be the end of the investigation into the double tap strike that looks like it killed two survivors in October or in September?
You know, um, that's a really interesting question, and frankly, I don't think anybody's thought about it yet. The uh, Trump has now, he's a past master, and let's give the devil his due. He is a past master at distraction, distraction, distraction. And whenever something starts getting a little hot, he'll find a way to distract from it. Uh, you know, the I don't think there's any question whether this was a law enforcement operation in the beginning or whether it was warfare because the narco terrorists are committing war against us. In either event, that double tap was either a criminal violation or it was a violation of the law of war, which is criminal. So uh, the but I think that, and it may well be now that uh, more focus will come on the Venezuela strike, simply because it's now a bigger
Yep,
and better story, and clearly the media will lose focus. In Trump's a master at manipulating the media. Uh, they're a cat chasing a laser beam, and there's no question that the focus on that double tap will now leave the media. But I hope that the Democrats in the House and the Senate, even though they don't really have any power at this point, and that may well change in November, depending on what happens with the economy. Uh, but Trump clearly needs distractions. When we see what's happening with the economy, with his on again, off again, rollback, increase tariff situation, China has clearly outfoxed him from the
absolutely.
word go. So, what do you want to bet there's going to be a big dump of Epstein documents this week?
Another,
No,
yeah,
yeah, another big dump. So he's what concerns me is what will the next distraction be? He's now invaded a sovereign nation, kidnapped their chief executive, whether or not he's a legitimate chief executive. How much concern is that of ours? What does he do next? Is he going to kidnap a mullah from Iraq, or excuse me, from Iran, or is he going to kidnap somebody from North Korea? There are lots of bad chief executives around the world, and what does he do for his next show?
And that's it. It's what's for his next show, and there always seems to be an escalation of some type. And so now how do you escalate beyond removing a president and kidnapping a president, duly elected or not, out of a country in South America? And yeah, where does he go? Because he always needs to have his name out there. He needs people talking about them, not about the Epstein files, but he needs people talking about him in any way that he can so he can drive the train, and absolutely getting the media to play like a cat with the laser pointer, I think is a great analogy. Um, and I think that's one of those things that the American people they get concerned about is in order to alleviate pressure on himself, what is he willing to do? And it appears to be the fear game is his go-to, where we saw that with the National Guard, obviously in 2025, where he's just started trying to deploy them to multiple Democratic cities. He was able to do so into Republican states because the Republican governors give him what he wants, but he was stymied in places like Portland, places like Chicago. He had a brief presence in Los Angeles. That has been overturned. Recent decisions have definitely flown in the face of what he was trying to do, which could be a whole nother discussion with you, sir, since you were the Illinois National Guard, adjutant. But I don't want to take up too much of your time. But it does seem like he is always looking for the next step. And now with elections coming up in 2026, which he is absolutely terrified of because he doesn't want a number of impeachment hearings happening, probably multiple, during his last 2 years. Where will he go? And I do think one of the options on the table for him is, we've seen this construction of the rapid deployment force for the National Guard that Hegseth mentioned. All of the guards have their own small deployment force already, but now they have been bolstered by the recent decision in response to national emergencies. And I do wonder if that's the next major step as we get towards the summer, where he tries to use the military again as that fear stick for the American populace to maybe prevent them from voting. Like trying to get National Guard to deploy to cities and, hey, I'm going to protect you, but making people afraid to show up and vote.
There's been a lot of concern about that, and I've taken part in a lot of tabletops over the last year or year and a half, talking about things like that and talking about the deployment of the Guard. And I would highly recommend reading the Supreme Court decision that just came down, where they let stand the Seventh Circuit ruling that Trump could not deploy the Guard in Illinois. Now, of course, that only applied to Illinois, but it certainly certainly courts throughout the country would be very concerned about that. But it was very interesting because I think that two of the conservative justices shot a warning to the administration that you're going too far and you need to back down. And the first one was Kavanaugh's footnote. And if I'm going to get too legal here, but I think this is very
Bring it
interesting.
on.
That Kavanaugh's footnote in the majority opinion, which was an unsigned opinion, but Kavanaugh wrote a concurring opinion. That's how we know Kavanaugh wrote this. Kavanaugh wrote a footnote where he walked back his comments in an opinion back, and I think it was August or so, where he said, it's okay if you're picking up people who speak Spanish and they're dark skinned and they look like they're foreigners. You can pick those. Well, he walked that all the way back in his footnote, and he said, hey, you've got to, it's got to be a brief stop. It can't be, you can't use excess force. You can't stop somebody just because they're speaking Spanish. And, it's a very interesting footnote. And he essentially affirmed all of the constitutional provisions that apply. The second one and that footnote has gotten a lot of attention from legal scholars. But what hasn't gotten a lot of attention was in Justice Gorsuch's dissent, where Gorsuch and Thomas and Alito would have let the administration send the National Guard where they want. Gorsuch said that something to the effect that it remains to be seen when, if ever, the active duty military can be used to enforce law against American citizens. Now, even though Gorsuch went along with Alito and Thomas and would have let the National Guard go in this time, that language, I think, was a real shot across the bow of the Justice Department and Trump's lawyers who have been pushing some of this uh, unremitted use of the military to enforce civilian law. So I think that was really interesting, and I think that is why Trump backed down after the Supreme Court issued this really kind of a partial ruling. You know, they didn't issue a full ruling. They just said, well, we're going to let the Seventh Circuit decision stand for now. And so one of the maxims as a lawyer, as an appellate lawyer, you don't want, you would rather lose a case in the trial court and not appeal than you would appeal and set a bad precedent. And I think they were worried about losing not only Kavanaugh but also Gorsuch, and as well as, of course, the Chief Justice who went with the three liberals. So very, very interesting, and it looks to me like the Supreme Court is finally going to start reining, and please God, finally going
Yeah.
to start reining in the Trump administration.
No, that was a really welcome decision, I think, for a lot of people, because a lot of people have trepidation about how far is the Supreme Court willing to let this administration go, and how many, breaking free and expanding executive authority. I think that is a big concern, as has been the conduct of the National Guard and the military. And one thing that we've always tried to talk about here is the fact that the military and the National Guard are professional forces. They're highly trained, they're highly educated. There's the UCMJ, there's the Constitution, there's the oath to the Constitution, and the United States of America, and that they have followed the law. They have, in a few circumstances, which are still again, the hearing about the double tap and Bradley and deciding to follow through with that double tap with the two survivors, that we would love to get more clarification on that and find out if that was a misstep where he made the wrong choice. And I think, but that's always been one of those fears that Trump has deliberately played on the American populace, where he tries to give the impression that the military and the National Guard will do whatever he wants. And, there's nothing anybody can do. They're just going to take over. And if you resist, then he'll go ahead and send them at you. And there was a lot of apprehension, especially in the beginning of 2025, that was the fear. And now we've seen, as you mentioned, the judiciary take a stand and defeat him on multiple fronts, to include the Supreme Court, as you mentioned, which I think has bolstered people, I hope, opinion of the military and the National Guard. And they are not just a mindless tool that will go to any lengths to support him. We saw Admiral Halsey resign out of Southcom. He retired on December 12th, based on what appears to be a lot of conflict over decisions that Hegseth was making regarding Southcom and Trump, and this was following the strike in September. So I think things like that, and not just the judiciary, but the conduct of the military and the conduct of the National Guard, are things that need to be highlighted, in that they have not gone down this road of following illegal orders, of, just doing whatever Trump would want them to do, a lot more than they're doing. And that has not happened, which is probably why he got so mad at the 6 Democratic lawmakers for, pushing the PSA about don't, follow illegal orders, because he realized the military wasn't going to do that. So having a senior leader on like you, this is a long response, but having a senior leader on like you, military leader, to kind of confirm that and to talk to people and to make them aware of the military's professionalism, I think is a big help. So we appreciate that. Yeah, I have a lot more I could talk to you about, sir. And I feel like this was a little bit of a therapy session for me, talking to you and getting thoughts from a senior military leader, and being able to hear your thoughts. What do you worry about? What is foremost in your mind? Last question, in 2026, as we walk into the midterms.
Well, frankly, my greatest concern right now is the state of Donald Trump's health,
Sure.
mental and physical. I watched that interview start to finish. And I watched an interview that he did the other day. I was in the green room. I was on a national cable TV show, and so they held us there while Trump did this press conference. And same kind of thing. I mean, his he is uh, clearly declining mentally. His ability to speak. The only adjective that he can use is beautiful. Uh, and I'm very, very concerned about how long uh, they're going to continue to prop him up in that position. Now, the folks who wrote Project 2025 are are determined to keep him there as long as possible because they know that he's going to do what they wrote in Project 2025. And if you haven't read Project 2025, go read the part about veterans. And that, as a veteran, it will enrage you, I guarantee you. They think veterans receive too much disability. They think the PACT Act should be done away with. They're and they think that veteran service organizations like the VFW and the American Legion are simply lobbying organizations for veterans and need to be clamped down on. So the so the Project 2025 folks are going to stay in command as long as Trump is the president. I don't know what JD Vance is going to do or where he's going to go. You know, he was anti-Trump, and then he got on board the Trump train. And what would happen once Trump was gone? Who knows? But frankly, from watching his deterioration in full view, concerns me greatly. This is the guy with the hand on the nuclear trigger.
Yep.
And you've seen that he certainly doesn't hesitate. You know, he's the Prince of Peace. But let's see, bombed Syria, bombed Iran, Nigeria, and now Venezuela. So
Canada, Greenland.
how much longer? How much longer can you be the Prince of Peace? So that's what really, really concerns me at this point in time is how long will Donald Trump be able to continue in office, and how erratic are his actions going to get?
Yeah, I think that's something that everybody should be concerned about. You know, we mentioned before about the escalation and just the events and distraction, the king of distraction. Peace be damned.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, I
where will it?
do have one other thing I'd like to address. I'm glad you brought up the Senator Kelly and or Captain Kelly, Naval Captain Kelly, and the other five congressmen and women who spoke out, who were all veterans, either veterans or veterans of the National Intelligence Services. And it's interesting how that controversy has all of a sudden died down because they knew they weren't going to win anything. They knew they wouldn't be able to bring Kelly back and court-martial him. And if they would have, I would have volunteered to represent him. But what they were trying to do there by threatening to bring Kelly back is intimidate every retired officer like me and like a lot of other folks who have been speaking out by threatening to bring us back to active duty, court-martial us, strip us of our pensions, so on and so forth. So that was an attempted intimidation of retired senior military people to back down. And I know because I've talked to some folks who have been reluctant to speak out and are reluctant to speak out because of the repercussions. And it's not just the repercussions, the potential repercussions of getting recalled active duty, but the threats that you will receive from the ultra far right wing, you know, the January 6th folks who don't hesitate to threaten you and
Sure.
intimidate your family. So that follows along with Hegseth and the administration's firing every senior JAG within a month of coming into office, and firing so many of those 4-stars, female 4-stars, black 4-stars. They got rid of anybody, and the IGs. They got rid of anybody they thought might represent a railing to slow them down. And that was to intimidate the remainder of the senior officer corps. But clearly, Admiral Halsey wasn't intimidated. He just said, okay, I resign, and walked out the door. But, sooner or later, the folks who've got that spine of steel are all going to be gone, and God help us when that happens.
Yeah, my personal opinion is I think there's a lot more of them than some people fear throughout the military. And after facing conflict in Afghanistan, Iraq, and multiple excursions, all of these senior leaders who have seen combat, witness, and sacrifice them, their friends, their families, for 30 plus years. It is my personal opinion that when they reach the final boss of, hey, that the last guy is actually the American president, I don't feel like they're going to bend. I think there's going to be a line where at some point they just say, okay, this something needs to change. Because I just can't imagine the entire military capitulating and forgetting their oath and the UCMJ because of one guy who keeps getting proven time and time again to be full of bluster and threats. As you mentioned, with, hey, we're going to go after these lawmakers, and now that has faded. We're going to do this, and then that fades. It's a lot of talk, not a whole lot of bite, unless you're now a former president of Venezuela. So I think it's my personal opinion is that the reason that we're still in this position where you and I can have this discussion and the military hasn't rolled into cities and done what he wants is because there is that level of steel in spines that behind the scenes we don't even know about, and the discussions that we don't even know about. Because I believe if he could do whatever he wanted to with the military, it would be very difficult to have this discussion right now, and he would be tamping down on any opposition anywhere that he could. um, but it's good to hear that you're talking to other people inside the circles of former senior leaders. And I think it's important to the American people that they hear from people like yourself, who obviously are worried about this situation and believe it's wrong. And it helps bring them some kind of comfort to know that senior military leaders feel that way. And there's going to be a few bad apples in any organization, but I do believe the majority of them are true to their oath and are true to the Constitution, are true to this country, and feel like you do, where there are lines that they will not cross. Sir, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time, especially on short notice with Venezuela. What do you do now? Like what is the main drive of your life right now after, all of these accomplishments?
Well, the thing that I do that's most gratifying really is I do a lot of cable news appearances and radio appearances, and talking about what's going on and about the importance of the rule of law in this country, and so I try to lend a seasoned voice to this debate, and without getting overly partisan about it. But there are
Absolutely.
clearly some things that are wrong. I've got a good friend who's now a retired federal judge, and we were trying a really tough case several years ago now, and it was over an Air Force '06 who had gotten into some trouble, and the prosecutors and I were really wrangling, and the judge called us back into chambers, and he said, looked at us, said, guys, after having been a E3 Lance Corporal fire team leader in Vietnam, not much bothers me. And that was just kind of a quiet message to us to calm down, get the case tried, and move on. So, but that was a lesson from that federal district judge. And there are a lot of people out here. We've got millions of veterans who have served this great nation's call all over this world, and in hot conflicts and cold conflicts. And I think that we all are greatly indebted to this nation, and I think that we all want the best for this nation, and we're not particularly beholden to the billionaires who think they're smarter than all the rest of us.
Absolutely. Sir, your voice matters. Your voice matters. And I hope people tell you that all the time, especially to just American citizens who are looking for, to reconfirm their compass, and that senior military leaders like yourself feel the same way about these things, and that you're in circles of groups who are also feel the same way. So, can't thank you enough for being here and for continuing to talk to others and raising your voice at a time like this, despite worries, despite apprehension, and showing that you are still true to your oath and you're still true to the Constitution, and you still continue to fight, and that's for the benefit of this country and its citizens. So truly appreciate you being here. I hope we get a chance to have you on again. Hopefully not with major conflicts and strikes on other countries. We could talk about other things, but thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Feel free to reach out anytime.